few had as much at stake during a siege as the women. When a city was conquered, the women were treated as spoils of war. They lost all their rights and were sold into slavery, mistreated and humiliated. For the women of a besieged city, everything was at stake. Therefore, they took an active part in the defense. Many ancient sources indicate that women built walls, took on logistical tasks, and even fought in active combat, in most cases by throwing roof tiles and stones at the attackers. Nevertheless, the role that women played in sieges in antiquity is still poorly understood. To shed some light on the subject, we will look at 4 of the most important ways women took part in sieges in ancient Greece, and sometimes even decided them. This video is brought to you by Storyblocks, which is one of the cornerstones of our creative work. For example, this rugby footage in our Hoplite Revolution video, this song in our Origins of War video, or these birds that you've seen in a plethora of our animated sequences are all licensed through our Storyblocks subscription. Over the past 2 years, I downloaded more than 500 different assets. From 4K and HD footage, various templates, motion graphics, songs to sound effects and much more. Storyblocks is great because it offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high quality media for one easy to understand and easy to use subscription, all while keeping you legally covered with 100% royalty-free licenses. Their music library, for example, improves our storytelling because it makes it easy to find the right mood, instruments and genres. Their pre-made motion graphic templates save us hours of work because we don't have to animate every little thing ourselves. For example, this heron from our video on ancient China is one of their motion graphics. Storyblocks lets you choose from thousands of pre-made professional video templates for editing programs like After Effects, Premiere Pro, Apple Motion and DaVinci Resolve. This makes your workflow much smoother and faster. Instead of animating this book ourselves, we used this template and simply dragged and dropped our assets in to create this nice little intro animation. Storyblocks offers a monthly and annual plan with no hidden or extra fees ever. To get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/Sandroman or click the link in the description below. Women were often involved in stratagems. When the Spartans marched against the city of Argos in 494 BC, the men left the city to face the attackers outside the walls. They were massacred by the Spartans when they set fire to the grove the Argives used as cover near the village of Sepeia. Because the city of Argos had lost all its able-bodied men, a woman, the poet Telesilla, led the other women in organizing the defense of the city. She knew they stood no chance in a battle and decided to try a stratagem instead. Telesilla ordered all remaining inhabitants, the slaves, the old and the young, to the ramparts and equipped the strongest women with weapons and armor to make them look like soldiers from a distance. Her plan worked. When the Spartans saw the numerous defenders on the walls, they retreated. Telesilla's story is unique. She is the only woman explicitly known to have actively coordinated the defense of a city. For this reason, many historians consider her story just that, a story. However, if we look at other sources from the period, it becomes clear that her story is at least plausible. It was quite common for men to leave a city facing attackers as far away from their homes as possible. Those remaining at home then had to defend themselves. It was also not unusual for women to participate in stratagems. In the Polyarcheticon of Aeneas Tacticus, an ancient work on the art of siege warfare, this is the role women most frequently played during sieges. Aeneas recounts, for example, how a stratagem saved the city of Sinop on the Black Sea when it was attacked by a numerically far superior army in the 4th century BC. To prevent the attackers from recognizing their weakness, the defenders chose the largest and strongest women, disguised them as men, and had them patrol the ramparts to deter the attackers. According to Aeneas, however, stratagems like this could only work if the women were not allowed to throw anything. Quote, "For even a long way off, a woman betrays her sex when she tries to throw." End quote. There are reports in the ancient sources that suggest that such tricks were also used offensively. For example, when the Athenian ruler Pisistratos learned in the late 6th century BC that the men of Megara wanted to kidnap the women of his city during the Thesmorphia, a kind of harvest festival, he seized the opportunity. He thwarted the attack, boarded the enemy ships with his own men and some women, and rowed to Megara. When the city's inhabitants saw the women on board, they thought their men had been successful. Imagine their shock when the enemy soldiers came ashore instead. Women were often successful spies. They had the advantage of not being seen as a threat, and therefore aroused less suspicion than men, allowing them to move more freely, pass through controls unnoticed, and eavesdrop without attracting attention. This made them ideal messengers and spies. Aeneas Tacticus recommends having women transmit secret messages by writing them on thin sheets of lead, rolling them up, and shaping them into earrings. In this disguise, messages were unlikely to be discovered. Women were not only less noticeable than men, but also made mixed groups less suspicious. In the 4th century BC, the mercenary leader Charydemos used this approach to raid the city of Ilion. He disguised his men as prisoners and had some women and children walk with them. As a mixed group of prisoners, they attracted little attention and entered the city unnoticed. The famous scholar Aristotle also praises women's ability to gather information. A tyrant, he writes, must always be informed about everything happening in his city. To ensure this, Aristotle recommends the use of, quote, spies like the women called provocatrices at Syracuse, and the sharp ears that used to be sent out by Hiero wherever there was any gathering or conference. For when men are afraid of spies of this sort, they keep a check on their tongues, and if they do speak freely, are less likely to be found out, end quote. The historian Frank Russell believes that these provocatrices were flute players and prostitutes who kept their ears open for the ruler. Otherwise, however, we know very little about Greek spies. The only one known by name is Antigone, a low-born prisoner of war who spied in Alexander the Great's camp. Of course, the very fact that we know very little about these spies could be a testament to their abilities. Unlike Telesilla, the average woman experienced a siege as part of the community. A siege thrust a place under attack into a state of emergency, with every house and home at stake. The ancient historian Diodorus Siculus reports that in such situations, everyone contributed to the defense. The young men marched against the enemy, the older men patrolled the walls, and the women and girls ensured that they did not run out of provisions, bringing them food and drink. However, as part of this collective effort in the face of an attack, women did much more than simply provide sustenance. They built defenses, supplied the defenders with weapons, and cared for the wounded. In Aristotle's time, this was apparently quite normal, and was even expected of women. At least, this seems to be the case when the Greek scholar criticizes the Spartan women for making too little effort during the invasion of Sparta by the Thebans in 370 and 369 BC. Contributing nothing useful and, quote, causing more confusion than the enemy, end quote. One of the most important tasks the inhabitants of a city had to perform was constructing and maintaining defenses. As the saying goes, without walls, the city falls. Gender played only a minor role here. The ancient sources repeatedly emphasized that everyone, without exception, took part in building defenses. For example, when in 478 BC the Athenian general Themistocles called the people of his city to extend the walls so that they could be defended, the ancient historian Thucydides notes, quote, "The whole population of the city, men, women and children, took part," end quote. In times of war, it was even more common for women to contribute to the fortification work. When a city was under attack and the enemy damaged the walls, women, children and slaves often carried out a large part of the construction work, because the men were needed in combat. For example, when the Carthaginians breached the walls of the city of Gela in Sicily with their battering rams, the women engaged in a nighttime operation to rebuild it. The work behind the front line was almost as important as the work on and around the walls. Similar to their roles in ammunition factories during the World Wars, women worked tirelessly to provide projectiles, care for the wounded, and prepare food. They brought bread and water to the men on the walls and ensured the city's infrastructure did not collapse. One example of this is the siege of Plataea in 431 BC. Before the Spartan troops arrived, the defenders sent all those unable to defend themselves to allied Athens, where they were safe. However, 110 women stayed in the city to bake bread, a critical contribution that allowed the Plataeans to hold out for over a year, before surrendering due to starvation. Providing food and projectiles and bringing them to the walls was not an act of combat, but was nevertheless crucial for any army to function. Or, as another saying goes, an army marches on its stomach. However, women did not limit themselves to such auxiliary work. Although they certainly didn't fight in the phalanx, they did fight. Their place was as much on the walls and roofs of the city as in the kitchen, bakeries, and ammunition depots. This is the Nereid monument at Xanthos. This tomb from the 5th century BC is one of the few pictorial sources on the participation of women in sieges. One of the friezes on it shows a woman on a wall. Most historians assume she is wringing her hands in lamentation, but historian Jennifer Martinez Morales interprets the depiction differently. She thinks the woman's posture indicates that she is about to throw something, and interprets her as a fighter. While this is not self-evident, this form of fighting, the throwing of bricks from roofs and walls, is often mentioned in ancient sources as a method of combat used by women. When Pyrrhus of Epirus attacked Argos in 272 BC, he experienced firsthand how dangerous a woman defending her city could be. Thanks to a guard who left a gate open at night, a contingent of his troops entered the city without resistance and occupied it. When the inhabitants noticed Pyrrhus's troops the following day, they attacked them. The men advanced against the occupiers in the streets and pushed them together, while the women climbed onto the roofs and pelted them with tiles and stones. Confused by the deadly hail, Pyrrhus's troops tried to get to safety, but did not know their way around well enough to escape. The king himself was caught in the melee in the narrow streets. When he tried to free himself, an old woman allegedly hit him in the neck with a tile, after which he fell unconscious from his horse and was beheaded by an Argive. Similar scenarios occurred during the sieges of Plataea, Corcyra, and Selinus. The women's struggle did not end when the city fell. As important as they were in the defense, equally terrible was the fate that awaited them after a defeat. They lost all their rights, were seen as spoils of war, and treated accordingly. In addition to violence and plundering, they suffered humiliation, sexual assault, and loss of freedom. After the siege of Selinus in 409 BC, the Carthaginians roamed the streets, plundering and murdering. The women were imprisoned, abused, and humiliated. The ancient historian Diodorus draws the tragic conclusion, quote, "While as for their fathers and brothers, who had died fighting for their country, they counted them blessed, since they had not witnessed any sight unworthy of their own valor." End quote. But even amid such tragedies, some women fought on bravely. When Alexander the Great conquered Thebes, one of his commanders forced his way into the house of a woman named Timoclea and violated her. Then he demanded that she hand over all her valuables, but Timoclea had other plans. She lured him out of the house, tricked him into going near a well, and pushed him to his death. Allegedly, Alexander was so impressed by her courage that he let her and her family go.